after dark, although I'm told it's not so dark on the west.
Actually, the West is pretty live. I mean, it's pretty not dark.
The days are getting longer, and soon I will live in Los Angeles, so we'll have to change the name or go later.
Cloud Foundry near dark.
That's a good one.
Cloud Foundry all around the world. If we go later, we can get more Europeans.
Yeah, there was just a woman who was from Australia saying she was really bummed she couldn't make it to CF Summit. So we shouldn't be prejudicial saying this is after dark. We have a pretty big Australian contingent.
The sun never sets on Cloud Foundry.
There is our favorite Australian.
Asia as well. There are some people from Asia here.
Carlos always shows up.
Yes.
He's a regular now. All right, and we got Waters and Dr. Nick rocking out the hair this week.
It's a little crazy.
So there's so much going on, and we're a week before Summit. Where should we even start?
Well, first we ought to introduce people to Unsi, who has a huge role, but usually be more behind the scenes in Cloud Foundry. So he's the architect of a lot of things we talk a lot about, so great to have him on tonight.
Thanks, y'all. It's going to be fun.
And we also have Dr. Nick. I don't think, has Dr. Nick ever come to After Dark before?
I don't think he's ever used a computer before either.
I don't think his mic is on.
He's unable to speak.
There you go. Try again.
Webcack.
Restart your browser. How do computers work?
We should call this Chrome debugging after dark for how many times that happens.
It's not a problem. Never happens to me more than 3 times a day.
We had a VMware CTO last week who couldn't get on.
So what else happened today? Cornelia just gave a talk at EMC DevOps thing. We got everyone's playing with Lattice. I did a bunch of Lattice and container stuff at Interop last week. We got the Summit coming up. Should we start with some ONSI, or you want to talk about Gartner, or what do we do? There's so much.
There's a ton going on. I think this week is pretty interesting. There's been a lot of noise in the market, which we talk about sometimes around, hey, I made a container run on my laptop. Is that all I need ever in life? And it was pretty fun to have Gartner come out and validate a lot of our views in the market, which was, if you're going to run a container at scale, they just came out and say, they didn't even say you need a platform. They're like, you need a PaaS. And I know, Schaefer, that was probably hard for you to hear. But
Gartner will catch up soon enough. It's fine.
But they said, look, this idea that you can use basic container technology to build your own PaaS in a rapid fashion is hilarious. And the best part was they memed it, and they had the guy who's giving the fine detailed point. It was like, one does not simply build a PaaS. And I think it's great to have Unsi on. I mean, as the guy who kind of had to
build one.
Go spelunking in the cave that some of the original engineers left in the big distributed system, and try to tune things up for major future improvements. I think if anyone doesn't believe you can quickly throw a PaaS together, I assume that Unsi would agree with Gartner on that sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, you can quickly throw something together that will do the happy path. The happy path is easy. It's the sad path that sucks. It's when things go wrong. It's when things fill up. It's when the thundering herd comes thundering. That's the hard stuff, right? That's the stuff that takes a while. And then it's the building the right abstractions, and it's easy to just sort of, fly by and get something that works. And something that works is great, but
it's always that second 90% that gets you.
Right, exactly. And I think that's been the story with Diego. It's like, okay, we have it working, and now the last few months have really been about making it solid, making it solid, making it solid, making it solid. So, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of thought, and it's not, it's not very exciting work. It doesn't really come out as features. You know what I mean? It's just solid plumbing, solid integration testing, solid stress testing, solid performance testing, to try to get the thing to just stay up in the face of whatever the distributed system will throw at it, right? And that's the hard part. And deploying the thing.
It's not that fun to pour the concrete foundation either, but you
Right.
should probably do a good job.
Right. So
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
exciting to live in a world where it's so easy to have your container, but you know, there's a lot there beyond that, and it's been really fun getting to work on that kind of problem.
So
yeah,
before we walk through the work there, why don't we actually highlight what the Gartner guy said a little deeper, because he made 5 points, and he was kind of going through this line of reasoning about why people are using these things, what they're good for, and then the punchline was you should not be building a platform on your own.
Sure.
yeah. I mean, I think if you look at the post, I mean, I should get it up actually. I have it fairly well memorized. But the first point was like, you know, using this in your laptop to help you mock things up faster is a recommended behavior. That's cool. Like, actually, I think that's what people struggle with, is they hear all this heat about containers and they want to know where the heat's coming from. And I think what the Gartner post really elucidated for folks, and I thought people just have to go learn this themselves, so I was sort of resigned to, yep, go do it, try it, is, yeah, because it works on your laptop, that is awesome. That's a big step forward from like VM-based Vagrant, which took a lot longer to do everything. So that's a win. But they said basically once you get beyond the laptop, you get to the server side, let alone the distributed server side, you're in for a lot more complexity. And I kind of thought the market might have to learn that the hard way over the next year, and we'd sort of be there for them when they called from the hospital. But I think it was great that, you know, Gartner stepped up and just sort of told people that already today. I'll get the exact post up before we go through the points.
Meanwhile, why don't we talk about the Diego architecture, because it seems like it's or whatever narrative you want to talk about, Lindsay, because I know since we started doing this since last summit, where there was an update, and everyone's looking forward to seeing you give another outstanding presentation, that some of the auction model and responsibilities actually changed quite a bit since that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, I think this sort of speaks to the development process in a really good way. You know, I'm not an architect. We don't really have architects. We sort of just try to iterate on what we have. And it's really cool to sort of look back at last year's presentation. And something that I want to do at this summit is to really just sort of walk people through how Diego has evolved. And so one thing that I was doing as the anchor on the project and then the product manager is that whenever somebody new rolled on the project or whenever someone asked, I would go up to a whiteboard and do a boxes and lines talk. And, you know, every time I'd give this talk, I'd look at it and I'd go, you know, this relationship doesn't make sense, or this flow of information doesn't make sense, or aha, I'm beginning to understand. The code's sort of beginning to talk back and explain itself a bit more, and beginning to see patterns and sort of missteps that we made. And, you know, taking it to the team and being like, hey, y'all, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that, and them going, hey, you know, you're right, or you're wrong, or whatever. And just as a team really sort of tweaking it and evolving it to the point where it is today, where, you know, for a while we didn't have an HTTP API. We were just talking directly to the database. You know, we saw the cloud controller as like the sole consumer of Diego, because that's where Diego was born, right? It was a rewrite of the DEA. But very quickly we said, hey, you know, we have these abstractions. They're actually really generic. If we put an HTTP API in front of it, you know, now it doesn't matter who's consuming it. Anyone can consume it. And, you know, fast forward a few months and Lattice is born, right? So that sort of just really fun, collaborative environment has just helped us be very honest with sort of how things have evolved. I think the auction is a really good example. So we had this crazy distributed thing, and, you know, the whole time we didn't really trust that it might or might not work. That's why we built this simulation. That's why we were very anal about testing it and, you know, trying it and trying it and trying it. And so I eventually had some free time, and I was like, you know, I'm seeing this work at like 10 cells, 20 cells, 50 cells, but can this go higher? Can I do 100 cells? Can I do 400 cells? And when I got to 400 cells, I was having to twist all these knobs and dials, and was like, okay, I think I've got it, but I don't think I can get it to go any higher. And the problem was it was getting more and more complex as we did that. And so we stepped back as a team and we said, hey, you know what? This isn't working. This is, you know, it is working. It's just not scaling well, and we're having a hard time understanding it. And see, it's sort of all in your head, and we need to change that. So we just did a 180, right? We switched and we made it this little centralized thing. It's still highly available. It has really good sort of characteristics around, when it fails, the fallback picks things up and moves along. And it's even more performant than it was before, and it's just much, much easier to reason about. And the coolest thing was, Google comes out with their board paper, right? This is like 10 years of Google's R&D, and Ted and I, Ted was the former anchor on Diego, we're looking at this paper and we're going, oh my gosh, this is very similar to what we've built, and that was sort of that was very exciting for me. It was like, okay, we're not crazy, our ideas are working, like they've worked at scale, and there was a lot of validation seeing that. So that was.
So what's
that was
what's the
exciting.
difference between the Borg and Lattice now, or between Diego? Now that you've read the paper?
The differences are in the details, and I don't know if I could really coherently speak to it. I think I'd need to sit down and actually sort of draw out the differences in detail. But what I mean to say is that the rough outlines of the architecture, the basic responsibilities of things, how communication is happening, is actually, it was surprisingly similar to me. So.
Are there differences where you think, oh, give me another year, I want that? Or do you go, yes, ours is better?
Nothing that really jumped out that way. I saw some differences, like, okay, that's different, but I could see it working either way. And part of me goes, maybe they started off with what we had, and then as they had to scale to thousands or tens of thousands of nodes, they had to do something like that. But for now, for the scales that we need to be at, I think that we're in an okay place. So.
Yeah, and part of our challenge is also keeping like you said, two things on C at the beginning. You're like, one, when you get off Happy Path, and then two, how friendly is the abstraction?
Right.
And I think our challenge is keeping a very app-centric, friendly abstraction over everything that we do,
right.
Despite being able to provide robust guarantees off Happy Path and at pretty high scale.
Right. I think the sort of strongest part of Diego, the thing that I'm sort of happiest with, is how the abstraction has shaped up. Like, we have this one cluster, and you can run your sort of build pack flow, or you're staging your app bits and producing a droplet. And you can do that on Linux, and you can do it on Windows. And you can start to make that flow more language specific by using the abstraction. We're not doing that yet. We're really excited to see where we can take it. To give you like a really killer node experience, for example. It doesn't necessarily have to be the existing build pack flow. Maybe we do something node specific. But pull all that aside. The same runtime, the same abstraction lets you run Docker, right? And that's just been really cool to see that just emerge. And it's been sort of us teaching the code, but also the code teaching us, again, those tight feedback loops, and us seeing, hey, now we really understand where Docker fits into this and how it fits into it for us, right? Being app-centric. So,
I mean, I think that's a real testament, the fact that we were able to pull Lattice off. I mean, I don't think a lot of people know that was basically a hallway discussion between you, me, and James Bear one day.
Right. Talk about scope creep. I mean, right? It was like, hey, I know you're running the DEAs, but can we do this? And the reality was it wasn't that hard, and that was really exciting.
I think that speaks to how well you did the abstraction, right? You could pull it out, and even at that more fractal, smaller layer, it made sense at the lower. And the testament to me has been that the Spring team, without me really twisting their arm, like Josh Long from Spring, a lot of the awesome, very app-centric guys at Spring, they've come to Lattice and they've gone like, actually, this whole thing makes a lot of sense for us.
Right.
In a purely app-centric mode.
Right. And I think another win sort of that's been internal that I don't think most people can really get an insight into, but now that we have Lattice, it's just become this really fun research environment. So, we talk about adding persistent disk containers to Diego, and, Ted, the former anchor, went off for 2 weeks and, built a proof of concept that actually worked. And he forked LTC, and he had an LTC command that, could reserve volumes, assign containers to volumes, and all of a sudden, we were cooking with fire. And that was really exciting, just as a sort of mini experimental platform to play with these ideas on the cheap and validate them before we build them in for reals. So
next time he has to do the ONSI demo. You can't do a demo of Diego and not take away 3 nodes. And he talked for a whole talk without ever once destroying a node. So that wasn't a real demo of Diego, was it?
Right.
Speaking of that, Ramiro.
But when you destroy nodes and you have persistent bits, those
Yeah, it's a
play
little,
very
it's a
well
little
together.
Well,
We'll have to
then
figure
what
that
was
one
the
out.
point? I mean, sorry, I watched it and I thought, all right, you didn't destroy your nodes, so what did we really just talk about?
Hey, Ramiro, do you want to entertain us with the quick demo that you gave at a little higher scale at the Morantis meetup and tell us a little bit about the reaction?
Sure.
And we can talk.
Sure. This is, I mean, for people that have seen Lattice like 100 times, this is like the most boring thing in the world. But there's always somebody that hasn't seen it, first of all. And what makes it unique about this one in particular is that this is the first one we do on top of OpenStack.
What is this lowly cook thing?
It's a line from a movie that I like.
Yeah, that's like the
Steven Seagal looking line.
Yeah, that the cook takes the whole ship over and murders everybody.
Exactly. So let me show you this thing anyway. This is pretty simple. See the entire screen. Should be shared. There we go. And people should be seeing echoes of themselves right now. Yeah, are you seeing the screen by any chance?
No, we still see you.
Okay, so let's change that.
Just the cook.
Just the. All right.
Show us the kitchen.
The funny thing is that I also cook. Okay, let's see if this thing's sharing now by any chance. Okay, now it should be sharing. Your screen sharing. That's what it says here.
I hope so, because it looked a lot like me.
How about now?
Yep. Okay.
So this is an empty 23-cell cluster, but let's see it from the other side first. This is the Morantis environment. This is a loaner from the folks at Morantis. They let us play with this one for the demo. And we set up, we could have done a lot more cells actually, but in reality we just did 23 cells because we exhausted the number of floating IPs that we could use. We ended up using like M1 smalls only, which are not huge, but this is basically what we have, and it's been running for a couple of days, very stable. This is based on a pull request that was done by this gentleman from Cisco. You guys probably know his name. Very, very interesting pull request that they did in order to make Terraform work with OpenStack. So let me just pull the...
It's a nice full screen for X-ray. I think anything beyond that, you're kind of scrolling X-ray.
Right.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's the point. It's empty right now. So that's the whole idea. You should be seeing a terminal right now. So in this terminal, I scripted a couple of things. I'm going to start, 4 instances of an app. So we do the demo up, and it's just going to do it all in parallel. So that's sort of the idea, to see how fast can this whole thing work, right? One of the most attractive things about Lattice in general that you guys probably know is how fast it is. And it's extremely impressive. Every time that you see it, every time you point it, it's extremely impressive for the people that see it the first time. Let me just put the number of containers here, as well as memory. And it's actually, I'm scaling this 4 instance of the app, I'm scaling it 50 times each. We were able, in this 23 instances, we were able to push 345 apps. And this was our M1 small, so basically each app is using 512 megs of memory only, and it's using, obviously, slices of 1 CPU in this case. What is most amazing about this is how amazing is the scheduler and how even is the whole scheduler. You guys probably know this better than anybody else, and I'm sure Onsi can just speak tons of the internals of this, and that's probably the most interesting thing. But what I found more interesting about this demo in particular is, like, as Dr. Nick pointed out, it's never really fun if you don't kill something. So that's kind of the idea of what we're doing here as well. We have
and that's very easy on OpenStack.
Oh, nice.
An included feature.
I did a little kill notes routine that is basically going to grab cells 10, 12, and 13, and it's just going to kill them. So
be gentle with it.
That's right. You'll never get them back.
Actually, I can get them back, but it's going to take a while. It'll take like 8 minutes, so it's not really worth it. But I'm killing a couple of VMs here, kill a total of 3 VMs. It takes about 10 to 12 seconds for Lattice to figure that one out, and then it takes another 10 seconds approximately to rebalance. There it is. It's actually a little faster this time. So well, there's the 2 of them that died, the 3rd one.
Amit was on once and talked about this. There's a configurable loop there, isn't there, Unsee, where it waits and it watches?
Yeah, and you can try to move those numbers down, but you get other instabilities if you try to, do better than 5 or 10 seconds. So that's sort of where we're sticking. The idea is that you have, multiple instances of your app so that you're highly available across 2 axes, right?
Yep.
Right, and it takes about 10 seconds additional in order to start rebalancing and relaunching the apps. There's a couple of quirk things in X-Ray still that sometimes you have to refresh it, but most of the time you don't. This time we're kind of in the wait process until it comes up. Well, we're just so you can see memory here. So it should rebalance in a second now.
Usually tends to misbehave when I'm involved with the demo.
If this is the demo gods help you, right? You know how it works. In any case, the only thing that you would need to do in order to restore the nodes that fail is just to launch a new Terraform apply. And if you do that, it's going to just detect that the previous nodes, died, and it's going to restart those 3 that failed. That's the only thing you would need to do at that point.
And this was a Terraform donated to Cloud Foundry open source by Cisco, actually. So Johnson, our friend who spoke at the first platform conference, who's working on some of the microservices stuff for Cisco now, donated this Terraform script, I believe.
Yeah. The name of the gentleman here is Matt John. That's his GitHub. And he pushed this one out. And the only thing that you need to add here is just basic OpenStack parameters. That's all you need. And of course, as long as you have the right variables in place, you're good to go, right? So the only thing that's not working right now is not passing the proper username and password. And regardless of what you set up here, is always going to use the standard defaults that Lattice is setting up. But other than that, it works fairly well. Obviously, it's not rebalancing right now, so we're going to kind of force it. I have this little forcing mechanism here that is kind of fun, which is, let's see, demo rebalance, which is a fake rebalance, really. What it does is just brings all the apps to 1, and then just brings them all back to 50, where they were. So kind of pushing it.
So what's going on where it's not rebalancing? I never had any problems, and I did this demo probably a dozen times last week.
Like I said, whenever I'm involved with the demo, it tends to fail.
Actually, I tested it several times today and it worked fine every time. So
hang on. Can you do a Lattice demo without ONSI turning up? Because everyone I watch, and ONSI comes in from the left, and I didn't realize that was. I thought he just came with the demo. Okay.
I actually think UNSI's bad luck. The only other time I've seen the rebalance failed was Ted's demo, where UNSI was there talking about it.
Right, exactly.
I watched that. That's like, and here's Ted, but first, let's cut to ONSI.
I tested this probably about 20 times, and one time it actually did the same thing, and I had to reboot one of the nodes, the controller node.
There are 2 ways that this can go south. So let me explain, and they're both sort of superficial. One is that the receptor that X-Ray is connected to for its event stream could be on the cell that you killed.
Actually, it's not. Actually, fortunately.
Right. The other, and it's not. We've just seen that. The other is that there's this component called the converger that is responsible for noticing, and it's also on every cell. So if you happen to kill a cell that has the converger, you have to wait for a converger election to happen, and that can take up to a minute. It took longer than that, so I'm not entirely sure what happened, but
Well, this should stay up for another week if we want to play around a little bit later. But that's anyway. When I did this demo the other day in the meetup, it actually worked fairly well. What I would say, the experience in the meetup was more interesting from the perspective that we co-presented there with Narantis, and we also co-presented with Google Kubernetes. So Google Kubernetes was the first one that took the stand. There was a lot of interest in their talk. You can imagine, Silicon Valley crowd is not so much about the corporate developer or what they think from the corporate developer perspective. They think about the low-level stuff, the more like the ops part of the process. There was a lot of interesting questions around storage in the container, and particularly around should we ever think in terms of having everything running in a container, services on a container. That's the future. That seems to be like a lot of the talk around in that meetup. I don't know what you guys think about that. I mean, it should be services.
So what's the argument for not putting everything in a container?
Stateful, primarily, right?
Right. So what was the argument for not going down that path? How do we not get there one day?
Oh, I think one day, yeah, indeed. I mean, I see no reason why not, right? There's a number of potential technologies. I have no idea what else that you guys are doing in the background. That's the question I had for ONSI, actually. What are you guys thinking from the storage perspective? I've seen this thing, Flocker, that looks pretty interesting. I don't know what's our point of view about that area.
Flocker, are they still doing their... Sorry, you go.
No, it's fine. It's, you know, I always go back to Diego's primary mandate is to replace the DEAs. It doesn't need to have that stuff to get out the door. We have to get it out the door. Once it's out the door, the very next things we're going to work on, well, sort of the stretch goal, I think, for the next year would be persistent disk and an improved story around networking, possibly overlay networking, so that you can conceivably run and manage your services on Diego. I think that's just where things are headed, and that's something that we're going to be working on. But it's just not what we, need in terms of a minimum viable product to replace the DEAs, which we sorely want to do.
Cool, but conceptually, it's not like we're not thinking about doing something like that in the future.
No, we're planning on doing that.
Nice.
But I also think that there's an aspect of, the use case I highlight here is you want a Cassandra cluster. And so when you're scheduling a Cassandra cluster on, like, say, EC2, like, one thing you've seen from EC2 is it's not all homogeneous. Like, not all instances are created equal. And so suddenly you might want an SSD Cassandra cluster. So, the auction could get a little bit more complex now when you're like, okay, not only need persistence, but I might need a SSD persistence for this disk that we want to start. So I do think that there are still some complexities to the model of having everything in that one model. We had the other discussion previously, like Mark and Bracchio and some of the other ops people on, where they were like, hey, I might still just start a dedicated whole virtual machine for certain data services like that.
Yeah, I think the problem to solve is the 95% of single database. Where do you put your Redis? Where do you put your Postgres? Where do all they go? I mean, it's cool to sort of think about the 6-node Cassandra, 6-node Hadoop, etc. But you can bring those up with Bosch in clusters. But what about
one of our developer guys loves about Lattice is he'll bring up Kafka, he'll bring up Redis. He gets this whole app mocked up in it really fast.
But the hard thing there is actually operationalizing all those things, so you're doing the proper thing to back up that storage so that you can lose those nodes. It's not very fun to lose data, and so it's quick and easy to get something up, but if you're not going to mount volumes and everything's direct attached storage, you better have some pretty sophisticated backups or you're in trouble.
As I was saying, it's not worth doing unless you're going to do the ONSI 3-node demo, unless you could start tearing down nodes and feel confident that it's all coming back.
Which you can do, but distributed storage is non-trivial.
Well, so I've been thinking about this recently, and recently you guys came up with cloud-native apps as a way of sort of describing apps that fit on Cloud Foundry, and that's kind of cool. So perhaps we just need to say, well, hey, okay, let's build a platform for which there will be cloud-native data storage. Perhaps not all existing databases will run on it in the same way that not all legacy apps run on Cloud Foundry and Lattice. So if we build it, they will come. I mean, imagine being able to build a data store where you didn't have to think about all this operational stuff. You could just build an awesome data store.
Yeah, but you know what?
Replication.
Back in Pivotal's history, one of the things that we had a lot of debates about was, data services like HBase, which were absolutely not built with operator empathy. They're very much built for what you might call the northbound user and trying to optimize for that API. And a bunch of pretty delicate imperative setup and teardown things that it's really hard to automate on. And I know that even the DataStax folks, you think about the ring model of Cassandra, should be fairly easy to provision it more declaratively. They've said we've been pushing the deployment automation harder than anyone ever has before with our Cassandra service that we built for that.
Many Bothans died.
So I actually, this is where I get cautious. Like waiting for the 12-factor data service to come along, I think is a journey, and I haven't seen it yet.
But every time we talk, I don't have to worry about Cassandra and everything. Just where's my Redis? How can I get that? Where's my Postgres? Well, I can make apps come up really fast, but I got to wait for a RDS node to come up and pay for that. I don't know. I just think there's a 95% coverage concept that if we built it, no one's building it. Flocker. I'm looking at Flocker now, and they still haven't solved. They're still not doing, the ONSI demo. They still say, hey, we can move work, but the nodes both have to be there.
Well, and I think if you look at our Galera MySQL that we open source, Nick, I don't know how much you've used that. You can give a pretty nice knock a node out demo of that, and we do. And there's even Switchboard now to help gracefully terminate some of the connections.
But it's using Galera's built-in,
Marco's on
Galera's
runs it.
Hey there.
Yeah, Marco, tell us all about it.
So as you'll see in the chat background, Hangouts actually crashed. So would you mind repeating the question? I just rejoined.
Well, I think we're hearing it.
Ask Marco the
That's
question.
sad.
Marco, we were talking about how, with Lattice you can give the nice demo of tearing down a whole VM and the cells rebalance, or the app's resilient, and talking a little bit about how with our Galera and Switchboard and everything we're doing with the MySQL demo, that you could at least knock out a whole node of that and pretty much nothing changes for the end user.
Yeah, the only thing you'll see is a brief connection reset. So what you do is when you deploy a failing over system on top of the switchboards, you can have multiple switchboards, and as long as you send all the traffic to a single switchboard, if a Galera node dies or goes away for whatever reason, Switchboard will notice, cut all the connections to the app, and then begin routing connections to another node, which is equally up to date as the first one.
So in the case of this, we had to also build, like the Lattice has the default HTTP, router, if you will. And for Switchboard, do you want to tell people what Switchboard is? Essentially, it's a MySQL protocol router with TCP awareness. Can you give us more details on that?
Yeah, Switchboard is actually a very basic system. It can be used for a lot of things that are not necessarily MySQL. One of the reasons why we built it that way is because we wanted to get MVP out, but also because we thought this is a pretty neat technology we might do stuff with. What Switchboard basically does is you configure it to route ports to servers, and it will do dumb TCP traffic flows. It doesn't do any introspection, and so it just does a basic health check on the back nodes. And it can be deployed for things that are other than SQL ports, but it works best on our stuff right now.
So you don't have a nice HTTP app, Nick. If you want to do the UNSI demo for something that's not, HTTP friendly, I think you need some sort of setup like that, right?
But except that the switchboard is the front layer. The data resilience is built in Galera in the back end, though, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Which is MariaDB specific, or can I use Galera for other things?
Galera works on MySQL, anything MySQL.
What's the behavior of that system if you lost, I don't know, like 2/3 of the nodes? When would you have, what scenarios would you have to recover from disk?
What scenarios you would have to recover from disk?
You have to obviously if you lost all your nodes, you gotta do something, right? So is there some partial failure where you're not assured to have the ability to, one, serve traffic, and two, you're not losing any of the data?
So in a standard 3-node configuration, if you lose 2 of the nodes, what will happen is the remaining node will discover that it feels like it's an island, and it will stop accepting writes and basically put itself in read-only mode. And you will need to restore quorum. There are ways of doing that, but we have instructions on GitHub right now for bootstrapping a cluster, and it will cause downtime if you lose 2/3 of your cluster, but you will not lose any data. You will not lose any transactions.
So the transaction means that it went and had writes on all 3?
Yeah, so the way the Galera clustering works in MySQL is it's active write to all nodes.
Right.
And so your cluster will be as fast as your slowest node.
Got it. So that's a consistency over.
Yeah, let's see.
Yep.
Which is probably what you want.
For this basic layer, it's what you want. You can configure slaves in order to provide read scaling, horizontal scaling, but we wanted to do something much more basic for your general MySQL user, and they really wanted durability over anything else.
If you're SQL inclined, you probably want that consistency.
Yeah.
But that's what it would take, Nick, to do the. I mean, that's the kind of hard R&D it takes to set that up correctly to be able to start throwing Chaos Monkey at data services and survive them. I don't think there's many steps there.
So, are we doing the work or not?
Oh, to put it on Diego Lattice.
I mean, the world is doing. Everyone's doing ephemeral apps. No one seems to be solving this problem, but it seems to be we've created the problem. No one had this problem until they saw how we could do cloudy apps, and all of a sudden they say, "Great, this is awesome. So where's MySQL go?" And they go, "Well, we have our own dedicated MySQL. What about Postgres? Where's that? Well, we don't have a Postgres. What about Redis? Oh, well, you need to do your own Redis." I mean, we seem to have created a problem that didn't exist because no one thought this way. But now we've shown them cloud-native apps. When are we going to show them a generic cloud-native service for data? I don't like hearing that it's hard. It just sounds like no one's working on it. I wish I could work on it. It's just I'm really tiny, small, and I can't afford.
I mean, there's other ways to reframe the problem. If you see the stuff that Lambda is doing, they reframe that problem. If you see this,
sorry, I missed the word.
Lambda, doing? Amazon Lambda service.
They're an event system, isn't it? More so than a data.
It's all about data. It's essentially stored procedures on data.
But the persistence is outside of. Sorry, I thought Lambda was just
Of course, there's persistence outside.
More so than in processing events, more so than.
Sure, but you have to solve that persistent story on some scale.
Sorry,
Can you hear me? I don't know. It seems like there's a latency problem. If you don't solve the data problem first, you can't do any of these other things later. And one of the things we're running into is these things you're talking about, these SQL databases, Redis, and the rest of them, they were designed for a different world than what we're moving into. And so trying to make them conform to these expectations you have is folly.
No, I appreciate that. I use the names. I shouldn't say Redis and Postgres. So we need a SQL. Perhaps there's another way of implementing SQL. That's another, the key values. But people want their little small thing. They want them quickly. And you're right. And perhaps they need to be re-implemented for a different platform.
Yeah,
I too would like a pony.
Yeah, I mean this is where the ambition to go write software versus physics of how data flows is always an interesting thing to watch. Like Amazon originally launched SimpleDB because it met cloud physics better than a traditional SQL contract. And then they finally did RDS, but they actually kind of put their hands up. They're like, look, it's actually just master-slave failover. They didn't even try anything too funky. They're like, if you're going to accept that contract, you're going to get downtime. And we face that downtime, right, because we've been using RDS and console for our hosted service. And I've seen the 3 to 5 minute sometimes failover, depending on how you set your app, client connection refresh speed. But it's like I think Amazon is showing the way, right? They're like, for a specific contract, we can give you specific API contract. We give you a very specific set of availability contracts. So I think Amazon's already pushed the envelope here, and they tried to be purist with SimpleDB. And I mean, look, one of the most popular databases out there right now is Mongo, which is the least of the operational concerns behind it. So that's what I'm saying. Like, we all get excited about cloud operations, but there's a lot of developers out there that just like whatever the easy API is, they want to write that and chuck it over the wall to operations to manage it. And I meet these people every day. They're like, our developers are all picked Mongo. We don't know how to operate it. Can you help us? And I'm like, once you've done that contract and welded that in, it's hard to fix.
But at least you're losing data, so there's that.
I mean, I have some physics training, I believe. I mean, tell me if I'm losing.
Yeah, no, it's the problem I think is that we've gotten so used to thinking about these stateless applications, and look how easy it is, and you kill them and they come back. But the problem is fundamentally different, and most of the most robust solutions exist at the application layer. They don't exist at the orchestration layer, right? And so you have to begin to define a really interesting and complicated contract between the orchestrator and the application. And so you could maybe live in a world where you say, if your application talks about data in this way, the orchestrator can help. But I don't even know what that is yet, right? And I think that's maybe an interesting, fruitful place of research. But like, who's going to start rewriting their databases? It's tricky. Yeah, physics. It's true. It's the difference is persistence versus non-persistence. If you need your bits across space and time instead of just across time, which is all you need for your app, it becomes a much harder problem.
Good quote. So, so what's the future of Diego? What do you think we do over the next 2 months?
What we're working on right now is performance, making sure that we can hit the scales that we want to be able to hit, and some work around security. Making sure that worst case scenario, you misconfigure your container network and have access to the cluster. Let's just make sure you can't wreak havoc. Those few things, and then we're going to start seriously transitioning in our environments to a Diego-only world. Dog food that, see how that goes. And I think during that dog fooding period, we're going to start adding fun new features. I think one really cool thing that's very close to landing, and we had to do it basically to support the CF files API of all things, is full-blown SSH access into the container. It's working at the Diego layer, and we've moved up into Cloud Controller, and we're adding CC support there, and that's going to land this week or next. And that's just been an ask that we've had for a long time, and I'm excited to see that land. So we're getting new stuff as well as just replace the DEAs. I mean, you get Docker, for crying out loud, but
yeah.
So does that mean you'll have basically CLI SSH to any container?
Yep, and port forwarding and SCP. And of course, you can turn it on or off. But if you turn it on, you basically have your little VM, and you can do whatever you want with it. What was the reason?
What was the motivation for doing it? Sounds like you were. I mean, I'm very glad you're doing it, but it sounded like there was some other reason you started doing it in the first place.
Yeah, I sort of pork-barreled it in, to be honest. The real reason is, the reason we're doing it before we fully bury the DEAs is there's one last little bit of API that we don't have yet in Diego, and that's the CF files API. The ability to pick an arbitrary container and grab bits from it, right? And so we looked at that and we're like, okay, well, how are we going to implement that? We could have done this sort of Rube Goldberg thing where we have our own protocol for fetching files from a container, or we could have leveraged SSH and gotten all of this other stuff for free. So we decided to do that.
It's kind of an API that only needs to exist because we never had the ability to SSH in the first place.
Precisely.
Yeah, but there are strong opinion people out there that believe once you've SSH'd into a container, you need to taint that and take it out of the at scale operation.
Right.
You could do that. I mean, you could kill it afterwards.
Again.
Yep. We can't do that. We're not doing that. For the first pass, unless I hear otherwise. It's not hard to do that. We are giving people the ability to turn it off. Go ahead.
And why don't you also talk about the kind of the policy layer that you had mentioned that for example, if you wanted to put it in read-only mode, only allow SCP.
Right. We think it's possible to do something like that because we control sort of the middleman proxy between you and your container. We can probably limit what the user can do. That's not going to be an MVP, but things like marking it as dirty and cleaning it up, things like restricting you to read only or to only like port forward, those we believe are possible. We're just trying to get a basic, very brute force on or off switch in place and ship that and then get feedback.
Now, we talked in today, again, it's a common thing about the difference between controlling at the container level, and you're talking about advanced networking there, but Ramiro, you and I had a pretty good call with the VMware NSX engineering team this week. And without going too deep into that, I think we're going to talk about it more at CF Summit. But with placement pools coming, James, Bear, even in current CFV2, even before we get to Diego, I believe. I don't know the latest.
No, we're actually implementing it in Diego.
Okay, so once we get to Diego, I know we debated that a little bit about when we get there at placement pools. With placement pools coming, one of the things we talked about with the NSX team was instead of trying to perfect all the networking at the container layer, i.e. now we're going to go reinvent all of the amazing things that you can do with NSX at the container layer and treat container guests as full-fledged VM hosts would have been before. That we might just do a push-button integration with NSX down through Bosch. We could say, I want to go at least create a new placement pool on demand. And that brings together the VM layer orchestration a bit with the things that are exposed through the container scheduler primitives like placement pools. So that was a pretty fascinating discussion, Ramiro, and we were really trying to optimize for what could be delivered with current technology as opposed to the aspirations of container networking 2 to 3 years from now.
That's the lowest hanging fruit right now. I mean, it's not very difficult to do. In fact, technically you can do it by hand with Bosch today in many deployments, especially with OpenStack, that you're dealing directly with the UUIDs of the network. So you can leverage layer 2 and layer 3 constructs behind scenes.
What's the use case? I'm just curious how we see people using this.
Segmentation has a number of different phases, right? I mean, there's 100 different reasons why somebody may want to segment some types of workloads in one network versus others. The thing is that there's a lot of investment that some companies have done in transparent.
I am familiar with the flawed logic that makes people set up a bunch of VLANs, but
this is not necessarily about VLANs. It's like, let's say, service chaining, right? Things that are occurring behind scenes. For example, a number of layer 7 traffic analysis that can happen behind scenes and can be intercepted or audited. Remember, the world of the auditors is a completely different world than the one we normally live in, right? It's all about freedom, it's all about making things fast, and those guys are completely the opposite, right? So for them, it's a matter of auditing absolutely everything. So just from that standpoint, the separation of duties really matters, right? That if you have other software constructs behind scenes that is controlling what the pass is doing, it looks good. You have the buy-in of a number of different groups within the organization.
Auditing is largely about conforming to what you say you're going to do. So there's always ways to frame that. But I'm curious, give us a concrete example of how you think someone would use this. I'm not saying there aren't, but I want to.
It's a matter of trusting, for example, multi-tenancy, right? Multi-tenancy is something that we always claim that we do very well, right? But the lower levels of the stack, they also need to trust what we do in terms of multi-tenancy. Right? So they believe, and they've been investing a long time in the network piece, right? So if we can somehow map our multi-tenancy constructs to theirs, they're going to feel comfortable. They're going to just give us the checkbox that they need in order to just go ahead and move to the next stage. And for us, it's transparent, really. It shouldn't really matter.
So you're saying you would have another segment that is set up with its own network.
Yeah.
And then you have to make Diego aware of that, or does it have its own separate Diego? It seems like you already sort of messed some of the multi-tenancy up because you're leaking information into that global space.
Well, the hardest core customers really install different foundations today, right? And that's a similar problem to what we were doing in VMware 10 years ago when people just didn't trust the environments. They were doing physical separation and everything, air gapping everything, right? So right now, some people is doing the same thing with the past foundations just because of lack of trust. So if we can just blur that trust, if we can somehow give them the constructs that they need underneath, so they can trust that they can use a single foundation for multiple duties, that would solve huge problems. The problem of pass proliferation, the problem of foundation proliferation, sprawl. You don't want to get that in large enterprises, right? It destroys the model that we're trying to build.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing we try to do with the containers, with the IP table security groups today, Andrew, right? We say, hey, we're going to limit this host from talking to other certain IP level networks. And this would be a much more enforceable contract where even if you escaped out into owning the OS, you would only have certain networks available to you as guaranteed by NSX. Now you could say, hey, maybe you hop around and you still can get out, etc. But I think it's going to be a really interesting feature, actually.
But at the top level, whatever that scheduler is has to have awareness of all these networks and has to communicate with all of them, right?
Well, but technically, isn't it Bosch? I mean, what we're suggesting here at the very beginning is to do it at the VM level first, right? That's the low-hanging fruit. What happens going forward is obviously going to be a different type of development. In the future, what we would like to see is like container to container, complete isolation, end-to-end. But, I mean, container technology itself is not quite there yet in terms of security that you can totally guarantee that, yeah, this container is absolutely as secure as the VM is, right?
Absolutely, absolutely not.
Right.
So now I have a bunch of these different pools of VMs. They're all on their own network, and this is the same question I asked before. Does each one have its own scheduler? Or is there a global scheduler that's aware of all of them?
No, I think what you still have management network access, right? So you still have to make sure that Diego can talk to it on a certain port. But if you look at what you can do in placement pools, I think and James Bear and Unsi are closer to this. They're designing it. I believe you might be able to have your own routing tier, so you could actually have the ingress traffic coming in on a own different network into that applications, and you could apply upstream rules in a completely different way, and have that kind of DMZ light if you wanted to for certain of these ingress points.
That's right.
The first pass was to just. Well, go ahead, James.
Yeah, okay, yeah. The first pass was just to put where the containers, the virtual machines running the containers, in their own place, and that place could have its own network that you assign at the operator level. And then the second phase would be to enable the routing tier to be in that network as well. So then once you get to phase 2, now you're having the complete client request path go through a dedicated tenant infrastructure. And the reason why you might be more comfortable with that is if you're comfortable with virtual machine isolation and virtual networking, then and how you've configured your access policies on that network, you don't really have to trust the platform as much. You might have to trust just the management protocol that's let in, but that's about it.
If you see any traffic on that network other than management protocol, you're like, whoa, this is a huge problem. Stop.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Schaefer?
No, it does. I think sometimes some of the stories seem like the picture where you have that path and there's a gate at the end of it, and then there's the little dirt around the outside that someone's walking on every time they come to that. So sure.
Now we're not trying to get into VLAN voodoo, right? Like I've been there. We all know it, but I think for big financial services customers, the ability to put their different internal groups on different things and segment is a huge value add, and that's why they're buying things like NSX today, and so they're already going down that path. They're taking an NSX approach. Is someone in a Staples or something here? Or buying supplies?
I think Dr. Nick's wrestling with his computer or something.
Yeah, there's a replication going on, right?
Right. So another low-hanging fruit that comes out of it, though, right? You can, it's arbitrary tags. You can paint VMs however you want, and so you could put, VMs with SSDs over there and VMs with, the GPU over there, and start to, have the scheduler be aware of those sorts of resources, and it's totally up to the operator to paint the VMs however they want. So there's security implications, but there's also just slicing and dicing the cluster a bit more, which
that's the thing that has me excited is the ability to do those tags and labels and start to make placement decisions based on this higher level logic.
Right.
And being on a network segment is just one little functional parameter for that.
Mm-hmm.
That was a pregnant pause.
Yeah. A word of wisdom.
I was really excited about that. I mean, I think we've always been pretty infrastructure agnostic, but I also said, like, hey, VMware guys, if you want to come and assert an unfair advantage of how deeply integrated your tech stack is with how Cloud Foundry thinks of the world, good for you, right? Like, there's no reason why we shouldn't welcome VMware doing things that give it an unfair advantage over other infrastructure based on the depth and quality of its integration and how far they go there. I think it could be very interesting because a lot of our big financial services customers use both NSX and Cloud Foundry together. So Ramiro and I are pretty pumped about that.
So then how would that relate to the other infrastructures? And how would you, so now you're just once you have the ability to do this higher level placement pool logic based on whatever arbitrary stuff, you take advantage of the fact that you could have that be NSX, or that could be SSDs, or that could be anything? Or is there some equivalent that you'd run across, say, the public cloud or the rest of it?
Well, I mean, Amazon doesn't have NSX layer 2 stuff. I think that, Ramiro, this is where we got into the debate, and I think it's an unsolved question. We kind of opened it to the NSX guys to contribute to the open source something that made sense, and that like an OpenStack, you continue to go to the OpenStack guys.
Remember when we were talking the other day about the possible NPI as a concept, right? I think James Bayer actually has been having those conversations internally as well. It's expanding on the concept of CPI, but instead of just compute, just expand it to the network. So potentially you can do a number of different operations that today you can do it with the CPI alone, but instead of that you can do it potentially with a network CPI sort of thing, like an NPI, and maybe even in the future for storage as well, or something like that. So if you end up separating that and taking it outside the realm of what the CPI is today, it gives you the advantage that third parties can actually create their own hooks and make it proprietary the way they want it, or take advantage of the software the way they want it. And for us, it's still going to look very generic because we can always replace it by something totally else.
So then you start having conditional logic that says these features are implemented, this cloud can support this or it can't?
Well, imagine, for example, I mean, the CPI, if you look at the functions that the CPI call, it's just like create VM, delete VM, change. I mean, they're very basic.
Well, I get what the CPI does, and now you move that to networks. But if you're on an environment that doesn't support, so the first step would be inspecting the environment and say this cloud does not allow me to have this type of network manipulation. Or does that logic follow? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, from that perspective, you have to have a minimum common denominator, right? It's similar to the way OpenStack Neutron works. It has
or do you? I mean, what James is talking about, you no longer have a common denominator.
But I think this goes back to programmable versus set up by a person or something like that, right? You can say not implemented exception, contact your network administrator, and you can still get them to set up a network for you. And it depends on how. Going back to your first question, Andrew, like, how often do you really need a segmented network on demand that instant as a developer? Oftentimes your operations people are probably going to be involved for at least maybe another year or two or so while we mature this
space. Most developers don't even know what we're talking about.
No, but Andrew, this is not for developers at all. This is not a developer feature. What this is a feature for people who've implemented NSX, and who the alternative would be like, I want to go create a new placement pool, so now get the spreadsheet out and start mapping NSX configs to your Bosch manifests. And here we just say, actually, these things are all API driven, either in Ops Manager or maybe in Bosch, or somehow we just give people you want to create a new placement pool, here's how you go do it. I've been kind of bored of network automation in the abstract before we had a use case. To me, this seems like a use case, which is, I want to create a new placement pool, and I don't want to have to re-hand tune my networks. I want the system to figure that out for me. Go make it so.
So one of the things I saw in places that were early adopters of Nicira before it was NSX is one of the reasons people don't change these things very often is it's so onerous to actually change them. And then once you had some of this functionality available, then the frequency that some of this stuff changed, or the level of granularity that people were willing to change it changed.
You're speaking about convergence timeouts or long convergence times at Rackspace originally when they were using NSX back in the day, right?
No, I'm just saying. Well, I mean that was an issue to work through, but then I'm just talking about once you could do this stuff programmatically and reason about it as an abstraction, then the reluctance to change it more frequently sort of went away. Where now if it's a ticket to someone who has to go twiddle some configs on a switch or whatever, then you're probably not going to do that.
Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to get, which is expose the ability to surface network abstractions the whole way up through this platform without manual intervention.
Right, and networks are becoming programmable, period, right? So they're an API call away from us being able to do things. So there's no reason why not take advantage of that, right? And that's just starting to proliferate all over the large enterprises. If you look at the richness of the NSX controller API, it's amazing the things that you can do, like firewall as a service, or you can do load balancer as a service. You can perfectly, instead of installing an HA proxy, for example, you can make a call via the NPI, quote unquote, and just provision your own load balancer, according to the needs of the system. For example.
Good times. I think this is one of the things that's been sort of funny and kind of a joke in some of my circles is when people are talking about data center operating systems, they're rarely talking about being able to configure the switches and the storage, right? It's all about sort of the systems, and so this would kind of be the next step. And how it all comes together, I'm not going to say, but it's definitely interesting to watch it all happening. So we're a good hour in. What's got? Is it time for secrets yet, or what's the story there, Waters?
Did you guys see that the Government Digital Initiative 18F is speaking at CF Summit, and they're going to come out and give a talk on. They looked at all the alternatives in the market, and the people who are the presidential fellows, like these are like nominated like to some of the smartest people in the country to go work on our biggest government initiatives, have selected Cloud Foundry as their platform, are using it, and are happy with it. I mean, I think that is a talk that I didn't even notice until the blog went up on .org and it reminded me how big Cloud Foundry is getting. It's something that huge, I didn't even know about it.
I heard a rumor, and I don't know how everyone's leaning politics-wise, but there was someone's campaign might be using Lattice to do some preliminary work, and I don't know where it will go, but that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, we mentioned that last week. A woman running for president has someone on her technical team that is using Lattice in an early stage for their dev environment. So thank you, Unsi, for enabling people to run for president.
Cool.
So I'm pretty pumped about that. I can't tell you how full my agenda is. From Sunday. Who's going down on Sunday? I'm going to be there Sunday. I think there's a...
Yeah, 2 events on Sunday.
You're on. What do you got going on Sunday? It's pretty late to talk about it, but we're doing a little bit of a CF camp.
Yeah, Dave Nielsen is running that there, and that's starting at 4 o'clock. That's over at the Hilton, and Altoros and CloudSoft are sponsoring that, and then we're going to pick up Cloud Beers at 7 p.m.
I'm going to do Mother's Day, and then I'm going to come in at like midnight.
Yeah.
I'm going to be down there pre-partying in the Hyatt parking lot, tailgating, cooking.
Are you going to bring the grill?
Might paint my face Lattice colors with a little square cube on it, if anyone wants to hang with me.
Right. Listening to hair bands, right?
Yeah. Exclusively Journey. Just a small town app.
Is this where we're at now? Is Cloud Foundry this year? Is it no longer really CF Summit? Is it Lattice Summit?
Oh God.
No, not quite.
No. I think Lattice to me is just, it was sort of fun because it really started as like a chat between me, James, and Unsi one day right over by Unsi's desk.
Mm-hmm.
I remember it well.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, hey, if we could give developers a sneak preview of all the goodness coming to Diego and also give them the onboarding. And now it's thrown around in the first rank of people who tried from scratch to build systems like that as just as good or just as interesting. I'm a little bit proud of that. But it's actually more about having a small-scale on-ramp to Cloud Foundry. I mean, Cloud Foundry is the story.
I think it has to stand as its own interesting piece of infrastructure. That's what validates it for me.
To me, going back to Nick's point about like what is it this summit this year about? Like I was talking to Hayden, one of the kind of the on-site people that help our customers take their pivotal Cloud Foundries to production, and they're going to be doing a kind of an operational talk. James, how many? We have like 10, 11 customers speaking at Summit this year. So I mean, to me, it's like
this is a little secret. You want to know a secret, folks? Here's a secret. Everybody else talks about how there's other Cloud Foundry vendors that are successful. I don't see it at Summit. There's 10 or 11 PCF customers on that list. 2 open source users, which are 18F and LDS Search. And 18F could probably, government's talking to us about commercial relationships, so that probably breaks our way. So I think CF Summit is a huge coming out for, I think, PCF, Pivotal Cloud Foundry, as not just the dominant, but really the distro that matters. No one else has done the hard work of turning it into software. I mean, people talk about what other people are doing, but only PCF is really a reliable software distro that people are using right now in the Cloud Foundry software world. So I'm pretty excited about that. I mean, we talk about Lattice because it's developer appeal, but 11 PCF customers talking about their experience, all Fortune 500. I don't know what you think, Nick. That's fun for me.
Very good. I wanted to make sure I was coming to the right conference.
People are probably getting bored of me tweeting about Lattice all the time, but it's interesting right now.
You tell me it's the Concourse conference and I'll come.
So why don't you talk about Concourse a little bit? What do you think about Concourse?
I think you and I talked once before, and is the CF command line, the actual user experience that people will have in the future of Cloud Foundry, or is it going to be a CI system? And it's hard to imagine that it's a CI system when they're all shite. But you see some nice, pretty ones, and you think, all right, that could be it, But finally, when I sat down and played with Concourse a few weeks ago, and thank God it was built by someone who came from Cloud Foundry / Bosch, not just because of all the resources work, but just they had that mentality. I just feel like I can just imagine the future where I have little robots running my life for me, and I'm happy about it, I just couldn't imagine Jenkins ever running my life. I could 10 years ago or 5 years ago when I first saw it, and then 6 months after trying to use it, I stopped really hoping that I would have that in my life. But so perhaps it's just because of 4 years in absence of really trying to get CI working for me, or having automation working for me. Perhaps I'm just ready for it again. But what Alex and Chris have built it works, and just hanging out with them. Then it goes back to being an open source project and being an open project. Them being on IRC is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Makes for a pretty good project in terms of So I'm trying to do my bit of trying to make it easier for the next person to come along and discover it. But I'm pretty excited about for what it's going to do for me personally, and for Stark and Wayne, and for our customers.
So if there was
and I'm hoping, and for what I can see coming out of just more transparency from the Cloud Foundry core team about how they do pipelining. And hopefully, therefore, it can be part of Cloud Foundry as opposed to sort of part of Pivotal.
So there's a real cool site. Everyone should pull up. Actually, I'm going to pull it up right now. I'm going to share it.
Yeah, this is awesome.
This is departures. You guys see my screen now?
They spent so much time making this look pretty. It's hilarious. These are all the internal projects that are transitioning to Concourse.
Yeah,
I mean, this is Concourse's bread and butter. Alex got so sick and tired of not having control over his pipeline, so he fixed it.
So restart that again, so it does the.
Yeah, sure. So it's just a little cool animation. Basically, somewhere around 50% of the CI for Cloud Foundry is now on Concourse, and they're transitioning projects. And Alex and Chris are actually kind of touring over to the teams that are transitioning, so they can actually help them make the switch pretty quickly. I remember.
Just to clarify, no one's been forced to use Concourse, have they? Like, this is just people thinking, I need something else. Yes, I'll try Concourse, and that's where we're at. Is that about summarize it?
Well, some of the teams have still been using a little bit of Jenkins or a little bit of GoCD from ThoughtWorks, but they're pretty eager. Honestly, I don't know. Are you aware of any teams that have decided not to switch when given the opportunity from Alex?
No, everybody wants to switch. It's just a question of, is this the burning fire that you need to deal with or not? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But everybody wants to switch. It's just a dream to work with.
So the funny thing about Concourse for me is it made me think about why I don't like Tosca. Because the way that Alex, when Alex was on After Dark, and if you haven't seen that episode, you should go find the the After Dark episode where he walks through how this all works. But the story about the frustration with the pipelines in some other systems, and then how fast they were able to move Diego onto the system versus how much time they'd spent before, kind of made me reflect on this idea of specifying the full topology versus just having that connection to the one step upstream dependencies, and all the flexibility and like the mental model is just so much easier and flexible to deal with.
This is all true. There is a bit of a proviso though, which is that it's not like we threw away all the GoCD work. What goes into the build itself was a copy paste job from GoCD into Concourse. But you're totally right, Andrew. The relationships between the jobs, though, that there was no clicking. It was all typing, and it was glorious that it was just typing.
Yeah, I mean, it like so many things. I remember it just helps the thinking through of what you're trying to achieve. I remember hearing Adam Jacobs, the chef guy, talk at the first Chef Conf, and he said, you know what, once you've used Chef, you can go back to Bash, because you've got the model in your head of what you're trying to do with with Chef conversion, right? It's just a tool, but the tool helped with the thinking. And so, I'm at GE, I'm trying to get them to at least be open here for Concourse. But obviously, there's always going to be this burning need to use the thing that they know they've got, even though they hate it, which is Jenkins. To say, great, I'll make this so that one of your guys can put it on Jenkins. I'm not going to do that because I don't hate myself, but at least the model is still in my head. I can describe what I was doing, and if you want to spend 6 months reproducing those Jenkins, go for gold. But I have every assumption that it's still just software. But it just really helped me thinking. I've just been so productive building pipelines in the last 2 weeks whilst learning it.
So Nick, are you going to talk about it at Summit?
Yeah, I'm sort of hijacking my own talk. It is the talk on Bosch Workspace. Basically, I've sort of superseded Bosch Workspace in GE with where we're going with what I'm trying to get us with Concourse. So, because I'm far more interested in the automation than I am in the tool. So, yeah.
What day is that going to be?
Alex has a talk. That's Monday morning. Monday morning, and then Alex has got a talk. I think Tuesday afternoon.
Oh, cool.
And basically, I'll hang out down at the exhibitors hall, and if anyone wants to learn, I can walk through everything I know, get you going. I think it's just awesome, and like anything, I get excited about, happy to show everyone. It's boring to know stuff on your own.
So my favorite part of After Dark is about about exactly this moment, about 45 minutes into it, when there's nothing that we plan to say, and you just start talking. And you assume that all the casual onlookers who are either watching the YouTube or wandered in have long ago given up. And so now only the most committed people are listening to this part of the show. This is what the magic last 15 minutes.
We're 75 minutes in.
What?
We're coming up on 75 minutes.
That's what I mean. This last 15 minutes is why I do Cloud Foundry After Dark, because now I feel free to talk about anything that's going on. This is the inner circle Keiretsu that would ever experience the last 10 minutes. So what was cool this week in more of the secrets category was one of our big sponsor customers in insurance, who's speaking at Cloud Foundry Summit, has basically written an edict that if people want to be part of their go-forward architecture, they need to be Bosch or Cloud Foundry managed. And then they add punctuation after that, which is called period. And so it's really fascinating to be on calls with these vendors who are basically being told, if you haven't taken care to Cloud Automate or Cloud Foundry Automate this software that we might pay you millions of dollars for, you might not get to do business with us after next year unless you arrive at a Cloud Foundry automation solution. And so I was pretty excited. We were on the phone with GitHub, and they're going to now be at Summit because they're getting calls from all of their customers, and who knows where this ends. But they're like, hey, we want GitHub Enterprise on Cloud Foundry, and that's something we really want. So to me, that's the pretty cool thing about having these big enterprise accounts is they can move the needle in terms of motivation for folks.
That's good to hear.
Here's a little secret. It's under embargo, but it should come out this week right now. I won't say the word, but you could probably figure it out if you know the story. I was doing some analyst briefings with a partner who was both a customer and also a reseller of Pivotal Cloud Foundry. And at least for me, just listening to them explain their whole story, and they'd already run open source Cloud Foundry as a service for a long time, and to see that they chose to really transform their whole internal IT in their business with our software, that was fulfilling and that was meaningful. Just to kind of, and obviously I was telling the pivotal side of the story, but just hearing someone in their own words talk about the impact on their own process and their own operations and development, I thought that was pretty special to be part of.
I can give you a quick glimpse at our secret T-shirt that's coming out for the summit.
Superhero. Have you guys heard the T-shirt that Ben Black wants to wear? He wants to go Cloud Foundry Punk, and he wants to write in a Sharpie.
Should I mute Waters right now?
Yeah, if we won't keep friends, you better mute him.
He wants to create a Sharpie.
Let us go up with the T-shirt.
He wants to create a Sharpie-based T-shirt that has its own primal
provocative
around technology choices.
As one does.
Yeah, I think that could be fun.
Is anyone else who has work to do tomorrow?
Yeah, you're trying to get out of here, Shafe, man. We finally got Unsi on.
I mean, I'll hang out. I'm not going anywhere. I got to do expense reports after dark.
All right. Well, I think, are we going to do one next week from CF Summit pregame?
Anyone who would like to can do that. I cannot be the one that sets it all up. So,
dude, we should do it from the pregame. Totally. Why not?
Yeah, maybe we can just do a recorded hangout at the pregame.
Yeah, exactly.
Day.
It'll be out of date by the conference. If you don't watch it before the conference is going to reveal the secrets that are the secrets.
Just make sure you have enough ambient noise to make it all unintelligible. You'll be fine.
But didn't you see the tweets that there are people talking about bummed out they can't come to the CF Summit? So this would give them a taste of what it's like to be there, even though they can't.
Yeah, bingo.
I saw a woman from Australia just tweeted, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I can't make CF Summit. It's far away."
It's on the West Coast. Tell her to shape up.
Hey James, are there going to be any streaming videos during the show, or is it going to be all recorded and posted later?
I don't know. The foundation would know. I actually don't know what the video coverage is. I was just thinking of that myself.
Every track should be recorded. Last I checked. There might be some streaming of the general sessions, but I'm not positive if it'll be. I can know by tomorrow, but it depends on, because they kept adding tracks, so then the budget to be recording got higher. So I think I know all the talks will be recorded. I'm not sure they'll be streamed.
But the keynotes will be streamed, or no?
We can confirm tomorrow and post it on the.
Yeah, I remember you guys streamed the first one. That was pretty cool.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone for showing up on a Sunday night.
Peace.
Thank you.
Good night, y'all.
After dark.
Night.